I'm now standing in front of the building where the very first Dutch computer was made. It was called ARA, or Automatische Rekenmachine Amsterdam. It was only completed in 1952. The ENIAC, or Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, was the first electric computer in the world, but was already completed in 1946. But how did this entire process start of creating and upgrading computers? It all started in the Second World War with a German cipher machine. This takes us to the National Research Institute for Mathematics and Computer Science in the Netherlands. And this is it, the Enigma machine, or as the Germans called it, Schlüsselmaschine E. There is only a handful left in the world, and this is the only one in the Netherlands. It's an incredibly complicated machine, and it was used to cipher and decipher codes by the Germans in the Second World War. As you can see, it uses only 26 letters, which means no lowercase letters, no spaces, no commas, and no full stops. Every day, the Germans would change the way these rotors stood, and thus ensuring another new code. The codes were most important as they were the Germans' way of communicating with their submarines, who kept intercepting American help for Europe. And every time the British finally managed to break the code, it would be 3 days later and 2 more ships would have been intercepted. So the problem wasn't that they couldn't break the codes, the problem was they simply weren't fast enough. The main reason that it was so complicated was that the Germans had daily key settings, which were the basic settings for every Enigma machine. Different settings meant a different code every day. The Navy kept a book full of those settings, but they were in red, water-soluble ink on pink paper, meaning they could be easily destroyed in the event of danger. Alan Turing was working at Cambridge at the time when he was approached by the military. He was asked to lead Hut 8, a section of the government's Code and Cipher School at Bletchley Park. Hut 8 was put to work on all this decoding and consisted of 15 men and 130 women, all led by Alan Turing. He finally led to the design of the cryptanalytic bomb machine. Bomb was designed to discover some of the daily key settings used for the Enigma machines. Seeing as they already had an Enigma, all they needed to decipher codes was the daily key settings. But the Germans started to notice that the Brits were understanding their messages faster and faster, so they added a 4th rotor to their Enigma machine, ensuring more complex daily key settings, and thus more complex deciphering work. Then one day, Britain managed to obtain one of these Navy codebooks containing relevant cipher keys, which meant they now possessed all previously sent messages along with their daily key setting. With such a big base of information, Britain finally managed to crack the codes fast enough to act against their messages. Alan Turing was the hero who designed the bomb. He led Hut 8 and was in my eyes responsible for solving Enigma. People have even said that the war ended months early because of his coding work. So Alan Turing saved thousands of lives. I'm now surrounded by things that are all classified as Turing machines. A Turing machine is an abstract machine that manipulates symbols on a strip of tape according to the table of rules. To be more exact, it is a mathematical model that defines such a device. Each one of these devices contains a set of bits. These can be turned on and off to represent a 1 or a 0, the so-called tape used in the Turing machine. This idea was first described in 1936 by Alan Turing. That means it was before the war. They say his practice with creating the Turing machine helped him design bomb in the Second World War. And did you know that every computer is in fact a Turing machine since it uses a bit system? This means every time you use your phone or your tablet, your computer, TV, and nowadays even your car, you need to thank Alan Turing for designing the idea of a Turing machine. And aside from this Turing machine, he also designed a test that could tell how real artificial intelligences are. It works by letting a human talk to said artificial intelligence without telling the human if he is talking to another human being or a computer. If the computer succeeds in convincing his human conversation partner that he is human, the test is passed. So not only did Alan Turing save Britain, he is also an enormous pioneer for the whole of computer science and was way ahead of his time. But what happened to Alan Turing after he saved Britain? Well, after the war he worked at the National Physical Laboratory. In 1948, Turing joined Max Newman's computing laboratory at the University of Manchester. As you see, he kept pursuing his scientific career. But it wasn't all great for Turing. He was prosecuted in 1952 for homosexual acts, when such behavior was still a criminal act in the UK. He accepted treatment with estrogen injections, chemical castration, as an alternative to prison. Then 2 years later, Alan Turing died in 1954, 16 days before his 42nd birthday, from cyanide poisoning. Alan Turing always ate an apple before going to bed, but this time the apple was covered in cyanide. He was found on his bed with the apple still in his hand, with one bite taken out. Some people say this inspired the Apple logo. An inquest determined his death as suicide. He would have injected his apple with cyanide on purpose. But it has been noted that the known evidence is equally consistent with accidental poisoning. He could have had some cyanide on his hands from an experiment he did before eating his apple. Alan Turing suffered a lot from his treatment for being homosexual, and his quality of life was strongly affected by it. In his time, people didn't even see him as the person who saved Britain and helped win the war. He was just a nobody. Luckily, years later, people do realize what a terrific man Alan Turing was. Winston Churchill said Alan Turing single-handedly enabled the war to end 2 years earlier. 2 years! He even said Alan Turing made the single biggest contribution to Allied victory in the war against Nazi Germany. Captain Jerry Roberts, who worked with Turing at Bletchley Park, said it is entirely possible Britain would have lost the war without Alan Turing. And after thousands of people, over nearly 500,000, signed a petition urging the British government to apologise for Turing's prosecution as a homosexual, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown made an official public apology on behalf of the British government for the appalling way it was treated in 2009. And eventually, Queen Elizabeth II granted him a posthumous pardon in 2013, meaning the records were changed to state that Alan Turing wasn't a homosexual criminal, but in fact a homosexual innocent man who was convicted of something that shouldn't have been a crime in the first place. And besides all that, tons of famous scientists have spoken about their appreciation of Turing's work. Alan Turing was a British pioneer and computer scientist, mathematician, logician, cryptanalyst, mathematical biologist, and marathon and ultra-distance runner, and I suggest you all vote for him. He saved Britain, made technology what it is today, is the pioneer for computer science, and was mistreated horribly in his own lifetime. So if anyone deserves to be the most famous Briton in history, it's Alan Turing.